Thank you, Representative Bulso, for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it, and I'm sure all of our readers appreciate it. You filed some bills this year that address two pretty big concerns voiced by conservative Tennesseans, including illegal immigration and abortions committed by abortion pills being mailed into our state. So I wanted to see if you would mind starting us off by go ahead and telling me a little bit about what prompted you to file the Trump Act, or the Tennessee Reduction of Unlawful Migrant Placement Act.
I'd be delighted to, Adelia. And we start with the premise that we're there to do the bidding of our constituents. And one of the issues that we heard most about in this past election cycle was illegal immigration and the effect that it's had on our community, both economically and in terms of public safety. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the legislature to do what we can to mitigate the effects of illegal immigration, which have just skyrocketed in the last 4 years with the Biden-Harris open border policy. And although there are going to be many legislators that file different bills, I was interested in trying to do something that addressed as much of the issue comprehensively as we could in one bill. And so I put together what you have properly identified as the Trump Act of 2025 that does three things. One, it defines the term resident or resident of Tennessee or resident of the state in our Tennessee code to include U.S. citizens and aliens who are lawfully in the country. And the principal purpose of that is to make sure that taxpayer-funded benefits are not provided to folks who are in the state illegally. That's sort of a major focus of our comments that we got from constituents across the district during the recent election, is that just the economic burden that's being placed on the state is something that we want to make sure we mitigate as much as we can. The second part of the Trump Act deals with this concept of demagnetizing the state, or making Tennessee a less attractive destination for those who are in the country illegally. Because what often happens is that, folks will cross the border illegally and they'll obtain employment, often illegally, and then take the proceeds of their employment and wire the funds out of the country to their home country. And so the second part of the Trump Act is it's designed to work on financial institutions, financial services companies who actually wire funds outside of the country. And it states in simple terms that financial institutions are required to verify the lawful immigration status of anyone who seeks to wire funds or transfer funds or sends funds outside the country, so that we make clear that in Tennessee, you're only going to be able to wire funds outside the state, outside the country, if you're here legally. That will, in effect, demagnetize Tennessee, because folks who are choosing to come into the country illegally will not choose to settle in Tennessee if they know they can't send money back to their home countries easily through a wire transfer or something of that nature. The third part of it, which will likely be the most controversial, is the part that addresses the U.S. Supreme Court's decision from 1982 in the Plyler versus Doe decision. And for the benefit of your readers, Plyler versus Doe was a 5-4 decision written by Justice Brennan back when we had a very liberal Supreme Court that effectively said that the Equal Protection Clause requires states to provide a free public education to children of illegal aliens. Now, Lord knows how he and the other 4 justices ever read the Constitution, particularly the Equal Protection Clause, as requiring states to provide a free public education to folks that are in the country illegally, but they did. And Texas, back in 1975, had passed a law that actually charged tuition to children of students children of parents who were in the country illegally. And so effectively, we're doing about the same thing 50 years later, because we still have the same problem, and with the hope being that once we charge tuition to parents who are in the country illegally and putting their kids in public schools, that there'll be a challenge to the constitutionality of that under Plyler versus Doe, which will give the U.S. Supreme Court an opportunity to review that decision and, we hope, overrule it. And so that, in broad strokes, is the nature of the Trump Act.
And how do you see this legislation, in cooperation with the Trump administration's efforts, impacting Tennesseans on an everyday basis?
Well, I think it'll impact Tennesseans on an everyday basis because what we're doing is demagnetizing the state, making it a less attractive destination, and then making sure that the folks who are already here, who are in the state illegally, are not provided tax-funded benefits. So every day that we demagnetize the state and every time that we make sure that taxpayer funds are not used to provide benefits to illegal aliens is a good day for Tennesseans. And obviously there's not any particular overlap between this bill and federal enforcement regulation because there are other laws in play that we're going to be working on during the special session to address that. So there's no direct overlap between the two, but they are complementary.
And another question I wanted to ask you is, it seems like in recent years there have been several attempts to bring legislation that is preventative illegal immigration legislation. Like one thing that comes to mind is former Representative Brian Ritchie attempting to bring a bill that would hold common carriers like Delta and Amtrak and Greyhound accountable for importing illegal aliens into the state of Tennessee. That bill failed in, I believe, the Senate Judiciary Committee. And there's been several others that have either failed in committee or, mostly failed in committee. So what gauge do you have on whether or not you will have enough support behind the Trump Act?
Well, I think what I used to gauge is just talking with my colleagues, and everyone who I've spoken to so far about it is in favor of it. But it's really not so much a question of support sometimes, it's a question of what the state's proper role and proper jurisdiction is. Brian's bill, although it might have been very well intended, deals with something that is clearly within the purview of the federal government. Like we cannot in Tennessee make laws about who lawfully can come into the country or not. That is something that the U.S. Constitution squarely vests jurisdiction on the federal government to address. So what I try to do, and I think what other legislators try to do in our caucus, is to draft legislation that is within the proper role of the state, within the state's proper jurisdiction. Now, if we need to challenge a federal precedent that's inaccurate, as we're doing with Plyler versus Doe, that's fine. But there really is no universe where Tennessee by itself can start passing laws about who is a U.S. citizen, who can come into the country, those sort of things. All of that is properly vested with the federal government, which as of yesterday actually has a very good immigration policy.
And then the second bill I wanted to talk to you about is one that you introduced called the Unborn Child Protection Act.
Yes.
What does this do and what prompted you to bring it?
Look, that's a very good question because every good bill starts with the problem that it's trying to address. And here's the problem. Although we have outlawed abortion, elective abortion in the state of Tennessee, nevertheless, we know that companies are continuing to market and distribute abortion pills to young ladies who are in crisis pregnancies in the state of Tennessee. And that's being done despite the fact that mailing or sending abortion pills into Tennessee is a felony under both federal and state law. And despite the fact that it's a felony under both federal and state law, it's continuing to happen. And so I was thinking, what could we do in Tennessee both to deter this criminal practice of sending abortion pills into the state and provide compensation to families who have an unborn child that is killed using these pills that are unlawfully sent into the state. And the result of that process was what you've described as the Unborn Child Protection Act, which seeks to combine our criminal laws that prohibit sending abortion pills into the state with our wrongful death statute. And effectively, the way it works is this: it's very simple. If in fact an unborn child is killed by the use of abortion pills that are sent into the state illegally, then the mother, the father, the next of kin of that child would have a civil cause of action against the entity that sent the pills into the state in violation of our criminal laws. And not just that, but the entity that did that is held strictly liable. That means there's no defense to it. All that the family needs to prove is that, in fact, the entity unlawfully sent abortion pills into the state. And if that's proven, then there's an automatic judgment that is going to be issued against the company that sent the pills into the state. And the amount of the judgment will be a stipulated amount of $5 million, which once again we hope will both act as a deterrent to the criminal behavior and provide some level of compensation for the loss of life.
So even the mother who might have ordered the abortion pills into the state and took them herself can pretty much bring suit against the abortion manufacturer.
Yes, because obviously, oftentimes, this is something that happens very privately, and so there may not be others within the family that even know about it. Maybe the father does not even know about it. But nevertheless, the conduct that we're trying to address is the act of criminally sending abortion pills into the state. And the fact that the mother herself has this cause of action will certainly act as an increased deterrent to the companies from providing illegally abortion pills to the mother in the first place, because we're trying to prevent the destruction of innocent unborn human life, and in this case, providing the mother with that cause of action under the wrongful death statute actually is a feature of the statute and something that I think will help end the process of having the pills illegally sent into the state.
Now, I'd say I can only imagine, but luckily I don't have to imagine since I have you here to ask the question. But this bill, have you received any backlash as a result of filing it?
Certainly not from anybody in the caucus. Once again, this is something that I think is going to receive widespread support within the caucus. Obviously, I've read in the press accounts from some of the Democratic members of the House that are against it. I think I may have seen an article about some of the Democratic senators being against it, but that's not a surprise because they come from the same party that had Planned Parenthood set up a mobile unit that gave away free abortions during their convention this last summer. So the only pushback that I've heard is coming from a caucus where one might expect to hear it.
Now, of course, this bill doesn't quite fit the parameters of the upcoming special session that starts on Monday. So what can Tennesseans expect to see with this bill? Is it kind of put on pause until the special session is complete, or how does that work?
I think everything's put on pause until the special session is complete, because procedurally we're going to show up on Monday. We're going to recess for a time, the 114th General Assembly regular session, and then go into a special session, which obviously is a procedure that's laid out in our own state constitution. And then we will all be in a special session where new bills will be filed and voted on and advanced very quickly to the floor of both chambers. And then once that process is complete, once the work of the special session is concluded, we will adjourn that session, and then we will go ahead and take up again the 114th regular session.
And speaking of the special session, it's going to encompass illegal immigration, school vouchers, and apparently flood relief. What are your thoughts on this coming up? What's your perspective?
Well, on the immigration piece, I applaud Governor Lee for doing it, because Governor DeSantis actually had called a special session of the Florida legislature just a few days before we did. And the whole idea is to make sure that everything that we can do with our state laws is passed and aligned with the federal efforts that are going to be ongoing to remove criminal aliens from the country. And so, I'll obviously be in support of doing whatever we can to make sure that our state laws are aligned and give local and state authorities the power and authority to cooperate with federal actors to make sure that that deportation process is accelerated. Second, with regard to the flood relief, I'm frankly, something I wish we would have gotten to a little bit sooner, but clearly we want to provide relief to our fellow Tennesseans who are suffering from the effects of Hurricane Helene, and I'll certainly be in support of those efforts. And then on the governor's voucher bill or the education freedom scholarships, I'm going to be in favor of that. And obviously folks have different views about it, but expanding parental choice in education has been a conservative value for the last several decades. And many of our most conservative governors have already implemented the kind of program that Governor Lee is seeking to implement. Obviously, Governor DeSantis did it in Florida. Governor Kim Reynolds did it in Iowa. And when you think about it, Adelia, it's not really a drastic step because in Tennessee, we already have a voucher system. Our funding mechanism is through this program called TISA. And effectively, each child has approximately $7,075 in funds that follow that child wherever the child is enrolled in school. And a parent can take the TISA funds, enroll the child in the neighborhood public school, or the parent can take the TISA funds and enroll the child in a different public school, but in the same school system, if they have space. Our law also allows the parents to take those same TISA funds and use them to enroll the child in a public school in a different county, if there's space and the county allows that. And then finally, a parent can take those same TISA funds and enroll a child in a charter school, which is a public school which is privately operated. And when you look at it analytically, what Governor Lee's bill does is simply allow the parent to take those same TISA funds and enroll the child in a private school, which could be, a church-related school, a religious school, of whatever kind the parents seek to enroll the child in. So we've got some degree of parental choice in Tennessee already because we have money following the child. And what this bill does effectively is it just puts private schools and religious schools within the universe of schools that parents can choose. And that's frankly one of the reasons why I support it, because if you go back and look at our public school system, you go back to 1962 when the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Engel versus Vitale case. Now, you weren't alive then, or even close to being alive then, but that was, I believe, a 6-1 decision that effectively removed prayer from public schools. And so since then, you've had to have academic formation of kids in public schools, but spiritual formation elsewhere, which is something of an artificial or an unnatural dichotomy, because when you're educating a child, you want to educate the whole child, academically, spiritually, and otherwise. And what the governor's program would do would allow parents who elect to do so to take the TISA funds and have the child's academic formation, spiritual formation, character formation occurring all at the same time in a private school, which I think frankly is a choice that many parents will want to make as time goes on. So for all those reasons, I think that it's time for Tennessee to join some of our other conservative sister states and enact this universal school choice program.
I'd say there's probably a good share of our readers that support school vouchers and a good share of our readers that don't support school vouchers. The ones who do support it, I think what they initially would have wanted to see was, this environment that breeds competition between the private school sector and the public school sector in order to make sure that both sides of education were doing their best to, train up these children. So unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of turned off by the idea that the money might not simply follow the child, but instead the public school would be able to keep the funding. instead of it going with the child. What do you think about that?
Well, you're talking about sort of some of the specific provisions in the
Yeah.
Education Freedom
Yes.
Scholarship Act.
Yes.
And I mean, right now, as I understand it, the funds, the TISA funds paid to a school system will not be reduced because of disenrollment for any reason. Child moves out of the district, child goes to a private school, or for any reason. The disenrollment of children will not reduce the amount of funding given to that school district. And that's obviously a feature of the bill that I think is there because of some of the concerns that were expressed in the 113th General Assembly that the governor's program was going to hurt public schools. Well, they put a provision in the bill that virtually makes that impossible. The public schools will not be losing funds because of the disenrollment of students. And so obviously there is an additional cost to the state, but on balance, I think it's a cost that's worth bearing because of the benefits of the expansion of parental choice.
And then again, on something else that was rolled into the school voucher bills, the teacher bonuses, the $2,000 per teacher, regardless of performance. I think a lot of people have an issue with that as well.
Understandably. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist as to figure out that that's there to attract votes. I mean, there's nothing that naturally flows from the scholarship program that would result in $2,000 of non-merit-based bonuses to all the teachers in the states. But this is something that is sort of the governor's signature legislative initiative for his second term. And it's important to the governor that it pass. And obviously certain features of the bill are there because it needs to have 51 votes in the House and 17 votes in the Senate. And I think the provision that you're talking about is there to enhance the number of legislators who are likely to support it.
All right, and then the last thing I wanted to bring up is something exciting that you're doing for veterans and to attract veterans to our state. It's something you filed called the VALOR Act.
Yes.
Would you mind explaining to everybody what that is?
No, that's the Veterans Assistance for Livelihood Opportunity and Relief Act of 2025. And the idea, Adelia, is that we value our veterans who have given everything up to their life. That is, veterans who have been determined by the VA to be permanently and totally disabled in combat. So these are folks that serve their country, and as a result, they're not able to work. They're not able to provide for themselves because they're now permanently and totally disabled. And one way we have of honoring their service, and in fact, of attracting them to Tennessee. We want to make Tennessee a magnet for these heroes, these patriotic Americans. One way we have of doing that just is not taking money from them. And so the VALOR Act of 2025 does three things. I mean, one, it says that if you are a permanently and totally disabled veteran, you're not going to have to pay for any type of hunting or fishing license ever in the state of Tennessee. Number two, we're going to give you a property tax exemption. We want you so much to move to Tennessee, or to reward you if you're already here, and to honor your sacrifice, that you will get an exemption from paying county property taxes. And that's something that the state will underwrite for counties. The counties won't be losing any money. The state will hold counties harmless and pay that amount for the veteran. And then third, if you want to register a vehicle or a truck or a boat, you do that without having to pay any licensing fee. Once again, as a way of Tennesseans saying thank you to our veterans who have given everything up to the point of life.